Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's listen to House Speaker Mike Johnson on his read of the state of play. This is from a press conference this morning.
I want to congratulate all our Republican incumbents who worked so hard to ensure their re-elections and our new members who helped us to keep this House majority, especially a couple of new members that flipped districts from red to blue. And we have an amazing group of freshman members who are going to join our conference, the patriots who are already here and who are ready to implement this agenda on day one. Now, as we sit here this morning, we're still watching a number of races. We have races still pending in Alaska, Arizona, California, Maine, Ohio, and Oregon. And we're going to ensure that every single legal vote is counted in those races. So while we're completing the work of this Congress, we're shifting gears and preparing for the next Congress. We're also still in campaign mode in some sense and awaiting the final outcome of these races.
Kim, what's your sense of where things are headed? The House press office says the party breakdown at the moment is 220 Republicans, 212 Democrats. So that is the 4-vote swing. Could we end up in more or less the same place? And what would that say after an election in which Donald Trump won the popular vote majority with some pretty big swings, even in states that he didn't win, places like New York and New Jersey?
Yeah, I have one word for you, and it's called gerrymandering. And this is a very tough problem. I'm not going to suggest that I have the answer, but I do believe that it's long past time that we now all acknowledge that it is the problem. And when you have people running around talking about how bad polarization is and coming up with goofy ideas like we need ranked choice voting to make it better, or we need this or that way of changing the way elections work, that's not the issue. The issue is we have 435 House seats in this country. And the vast majority of them, I mean, pretty much all of them other than maybe 50, maybe even fewer, have been so cut and shaped by state legislatures to lock in this party or that party's majority at like +7, +8 points partisan advantage for this or that party, that these races are rarely competitive. The action, to the extent you end up having any action in those districts, is often at the primary level. All that does is allow someone that's a little bit more radical to the party to come in to say, for instance, into a Democratic district and say, this congressman may have been here for a long time and might be liberal, but I'm even more liberal and you should vote for me. And often they win those primaries. Look at Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. That's how you end up with her in the House, because that district is so far baked in for Democrats that, I mean, I think Nancy Pelosi once said you could run a glass of water with the letter D after its name and it would get elected. And that is the state in so many districts across the country. I think it's remarkable. It says everything that after hundreds of millions of dollars in these races, that we're likely to end up with pretty much the exact same situation that we went into this election with, Republicans probably with like a 4-seat majority. And one other last thing, just to this point, if you look at the few seats out there that did flip in this election, a huge number of them are districts that were recently redistricted. And so the party came in and set it for their advantage and got a bit of an advantage over the other side who currently held the seat. And that's why those particular half dozen or dozen seats actually had a change in ownership. Again, this is something I don't know the answer is, but until there's a change, we're going to continue having a very closely divided House and a lot of money that goes into basically maintaining the status quo.
Finding the answer is the real trick on the gerrymandering problem, it seems to me, because you could do it at the state level, and some states have done that, banning partisan gerrymandering in their state constitution. That seems to have been somewhat ineffective in New York. On the other hand, the blue states don't want to do that if the red states are not going to do that, and vice versa. Congress could pass some kind of law limiting gerrymandering. But if you have only 50 seats out of 435 in the House, more or less, that are competitive races, that means you have something like 380 people in Congress who have safe seats because of these gerrymandered maps. So action in Congress is not particularly likely, at least to my eye. But Monet, one note of optimism here is that there is a self-limiting nature to gerrymandering. The 2024 elections have been run under gerrymandering maps, redistricting maps that were passed shortly after the 2020 census. And so these are fresh maps that have just been redrawn. And what happens over the decade, though, is that voters move, the political winds can change. So that is when you get some real wipeouts then later on in the decade, the 2030 election, let's say, when many of those districts that were drawn 51 Democrat or 51 Republican, who knows what's going to happen 4 or 6 years from now, those seats could all go at once. And that's part of the problem is the closer that the gerrymanderers try to cut it, the more that they are putting themselves in those seats at risk if the political winds change.
Right. I think that you do see, for example, in a state like New York, that the migration patterns, and particularly we've seen accelerated out-migration in the 4 years since COVID, do also affect the partisan balance in some of these districts. And so you have the courts constraining in some cases, the worst instances of districts being redrawn to shift the balance. But no matter how hard the parties in the state legislature are trying to narrowly calibrate exactly to maximize their advantages in some of these House races, there's no way to perfectly do it because you don't have static partisan breakdown in any particular region. And so over the long arc, parties are going to be able to shift to compete where they're most able to do so. And voters having their own ideas about where they want to live and vote is going to make it so that you have a little bit of dynamism. But obviously, the overarching truth today is that there is much less competitiveness in the House overall than you would ideally want to see in a democratic system.
Thank you, Monet. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.